everybody, welcome to this presentation on exam wellbeing. So this is just to give you a bit of advice, information and guidance around how to cope and prepare and how to make sure that you're taking that time for self-care as well during this mock assessment period. So hopefully by the end of the session you'll have developed an understanding of the purpose of exams, looked at some ways to reduce anxiousness or nervousness around the examination period, think more positively about the purpose of assessment as well, and flip your thinking so that you're not necessarily focused on it as being a negative aspect, and developing some of the self-care strategies to prevent burnout as well, because self-care is crucial, particularly at a time when you might be cramming information, looking at revision, etc. So why do we need exams? We are going to be assessed in lots of different things across our lifespan, and that's from being a young person in education to being, in an adult who's been working 20, 30 years. There's always going to be ways, shapes and forms that we're going to be tested. So it might be things like driving examinations that you do as part of training for your job. Particularly as members of staff in college, we do things like safeguarding training every year where we get assessed on things. So being nervous around examination is, a very natural thing. It's something that you'll experience at multiple points throughout your life, but it's important that you are spending this time now preparing for those instances so that you know what to do and how to cope when you are feeling a little bit on edge about things. We need to develop the skills to be assessed under pressure, because we need to be able to go into these things knowing how to cope and how to manage. It creates practical expansion and development of your memory. So physically, as you're reviewing content, you are expanding your brain, and I'll explain a little bit about that in a second. But it's also about testing your knowledge and having a look at what your ability is to retain information. So linking back to what I said about the memory, your hippocampus, which is the part of your brain that controls or stores memory, physically can shrink and grow. And if you are practicing techniques and strategies to learn information and reviewing content, your hippocampus will grow in size. So think of it as almost like a physical aspect as well. You can really train your brain to remember lots more content than you just absorb on a daily basis. And one of the main ways that you do that is through repetition, so going over information. So you do have the physical capacity as well as the mental capacity to make your memory stronger. And don't see it as a task to try and remember all of this stuff. See it as something that will come a lot more naturally as you get into the rhythm of revision. It's really important that we understand this context, because you are in a very different circumstance to what we've seen in previous years. So never in the modern history of education, exams, have we ever seen a year group that hasn't sat a formal examination for things like GCSE or A-levels before. It's a very unique circumstance. Nobody could have ever predicted this pandemic. It has massively impacted the normal education process. That isn't your fault, and it's completely out of anybody's control. But what we need to do is put that in perspective. What it doesn't mean is that there can never be a return to formal assessment. That wouldn't be beneficial in any way, shape or form. To never be formally assessed again would be incredibly dangerous, in the sense that how would you ever be able to prepare for real world situations that aren't going to adapt to your circumstances? Because there are things out there where you will be assessed, like driving tests, job interviews, etc., that won't think, oh, this person, did suffer from the pandemic or was in education during the pandemic and isn't used to this. They're not going to change the way that they work just because of the circumstance that you're in now. So it's really important that as an education system, we now support you into getting back into the rhythm of, I suppose, in air quotes, that normal life that we had before. So I'm giving obviously some examples there: driving tests, job interviews, deadlines that you'll have to meet at work. Lots of different situations that you will be faced with later in life. So the sooner you're familiar with examination, the better it's going to be for you, and the more at an advantage you will be. Some schools or colleges might be adapting the way that they assess their students, but as new college students, you are at a massive advantage being assessed in the traditional way, because it's far more realistic. Why train you in a method that isn't relevant to the real world? Sometimes we might learn things in subjects, might we, like, and think, oh, when am I ever going to need this again? what would be the point in completely changing the way that you're assessed when nothing in your future is going to be different? Do you see what I mean with that? It doesn't make sense, does it? So the sooner that we can get you back into the rhythm, preparing you for your next stages in life, it makes far more sense to do it that way. So let's flip the thinking. Let's keep it in perspective and look at how we can change the way that we might perceive the examination period, the mock exams, revision, etc. So exams are a very natural part of education. It's nothing new. It's just something that you're not used to. You've never been born doing many of the things that you do. Walking, talking, learning how to do things, subject content, etc. You've learned those things through practice. So the only way you'll become used to exams is through practicing them. And it's really great that you're getting practice runs. Can you imagine never knowing what an exam's like and then being faced with the real thing in summer? That'd be absolute carnage. So actually, it's really good that you're getting this opportunity to practice, because you're getting used to how the paper might look, you're getting used to the sorts of questions you might be asked, you're getting used to the environment. And if you've looked at the previous video and PowerPoint that I shared about anxiety, I mentioned in there that tackling that anxiety stimulus head on is key. If you never get exposed to any situations like this, how can you know what to do? So you're getting the opportunity now to do this, and you're getting the opportunity to show what you're capable of in case of the need for evidence down the line, for things like tags. So let's say, for example, if in summer something else was to happen, another variant, etc., who knows? If the government did decide tags, at least you've got this evidence now of, showing what you're capable of. So it's building your profile, building your foundations, ready for a successful education. So mock exams are not a threat, they're not something to be fearful of, they're actually something to look forward to, in the sense that you're getting an opportunity to do a practice run, so that you're much better prepared for the real thing over summer. Always remember that success isn't a straight line. There are dips, there are times when we might not perform how we normally would, there are times when we might wobble, and that's absolutely fine. Nobody is expecting you to absolutely smash all of these and never ever get anything wrong. That's really unrealistic. So think of it that way as well. Don't see it as that you've just got to do better and better and better every time. As humans, we learn far better from making mistakes or not getting a particular grade that we hoped for. So think of it maybe in the sense of, think of when you got something wrong and you felt a little bit embarrassed or you felt a little bit upset. You'll remember that much more than all the times that you've got something right, and that'll stick with you a little bit more. So you're more conscious of it the next time it comes up. You're far less likely to make that mistake again. It's a bit like getting told off as a child. If we do something wrong, we remember that horrible feeling of being told off for it, so we make sure that we don't do it again. It's the same with exams and revision. If we get something wrong, it sticks in his mind a lot better. Many people who aren't keen on exams are also incredibly successful with the practical skills they develop as part of the process. So okay, you might not perform the best in the actual paper, the exam itself, but those practical skills that you've taken from preparing for that exam, sitting that exam, dealing with what might be the disappointment afterwards, those are real life practical skills that you can transfer to lots of different things. So the exam itself is beneficial in many ways. These are some common things that students will say to us during wellbeing appointments or in general discussion. I can't cope with the silence. So what I'd like you to consider is, if you feel like that's something that probably crosses your mind, do you ever feel like class is too loud and too hectic? Do you ever feel like you can't think straight, or just wish people had, shut up while you can get on with your work? Now's your chance. You're in a quiet room. You're in an exam hall that's in silence. It's a peaceful space. It offers you that quiet time. You can think about your content. You can process your answers without knowing what anybody else is thinking, without knowing or hearing anybody else chatting on about things. So change that concern around it being a silent, awkward space to a quiet, comfortable space. I can't sit in a big exam hall with everyone looking at me. Hand on heart, people are far more worried about their own paper. They're going to be nervous about their own performance in that exam hall. They're far more likely to be looking at their own paper, looking at their desk, than they are looking at you. You can't turn around in exams, so they're not going to be turning around to look directly at you. If you're at the front, you won't be able to see anybody looking at you. So in theory, it's an overthought, it's not necessarily a fact. What if I run out of time? Well, that's the whole point of examinations in a trial basis. You're getting used to the time restriction that's on you. You're seeing whether you can perform in that limited amount of time. If you can't, if you don't manage to finish a paper, it's a mock exam, it's okay, that's the purpose of it. You're practicing. So now, moving forward, you're going to know what to practice as part of your revision. You're going to be able to time yourself more effectively. You're going to be more prepared for the real thing. And a lot of young people say to us as well, I don't want to let people down. All you can do is try your best, and that sounds very cliche, but cliches exist for a reason. All you can do is try your best. You'll know in yourself whether you've tried your best or not and put everything into it that you can. There's only you that will know that. And if you have, then you know your truth. You can sit comfortable with that. Remember that you're far more likely to underperform if you're burning yourself out, if you're over-revising or you're worrying. If you're burning yourself out and if you're absolutely shattered because you're up late revising every night, you're not going to get the grade that you deserve or want. Take self-care. Allow yourself that time to have a rest and a break because you'll perform much better. So practical tips and strategies to effectively manage exam well-being. The purpose of it being worded as exam well-being is that it doesn't necessarily have to be about stress. Some people can be worried about things but not necessarily feel stressed. So well-being is key. Be realistic about what you can achieve in a day. You're not going to be able to revise a whole module or one course in one night. It's not practical. You're not going to be able to retain everything that you go through. So be realistic about the amount that you can absorb. Remember, not everybody studies in the same way. Do what works for you. If it's colour-based stuff, if you colour coordinate things, go for it. Post-its, stick them on your wall. Go for a classic spider diagram if that's what you prefer. Review your notes. Record yourself and play it back if you like the ability to hear something rather than just staring at a piece of paper. Nobody needs to know how you revise. You might feel like an absolute fool doing some of the revision strategies, but you know what? If it works, then that's important. But acknowledge if it's not working. That's vital as well. If you're constantly doing mind maps and using colour pens and nothing's sticking in your mind, it doesn't work. Stop doing it. You might enjoy doing it, but if it's not working, you're wasting your time. So try something different. Go out of your comfort zone, practice new strategies and persevere with them as well. You know, if it doesn't sink in one night, don't give it up. Try it again. This slide is more for the perfectionist amongst you, so always remember that perfection doesn't exist. And in many senses, it's far more perfect to be imperfect. The idea that it's far more natural and normal to not get everything right 100% of the time. If you perform at the top all the time, where's the room for improvement? If you're constantly striving and getting A stars and A's all the way through, that in itself is a fantastic achievement. But if you're really struggling because you're aiming for that every time, reassess that. Where's the room for improvement if that's all you ever know? How can you ever celebrate doing better than last time if you get it right all the time? And what I'm saying is, you know, like this is in the context of if you are really burning yourself out trying to achieve this. If this is something that comes very naturally to you, then this perhaps isn't as applicable. It's more for those of you that are striving for this all the time and damaging your well-being in the process. So think about, you know, give yourself that opportunity to do better. It's okay to maybe perform at C or B grade because then you can work your way up from somewhere. Often, assumptions of others having high expectations of us, so if we feel like parents expect things really highly of us, or teachers, etc., that comes from a really deep-rooted place of us having the highest expectations of ourselves. We assume that others think this of us because actually we're expecting it of ourselves internally. So aspire realistically, not drastically. Try not to be panicking thinking I've got to get A's and A stars in mock exams if all you've ever performed at so far is sort of, D, C, B grade. Aspire realistically. If you've been working at D and C, aspire for the B. Don't necessarily go straight for the A and A star because that's a little bit more unrealistic. You've more chance of achieving something that's a little bit closer to home. Manage revision in small chunks rather than cramming whole evenings. So things like, this isn't a set way of doing it, but you could do 30 minutes of a subject, give yourself a small break, 30 minutes of another subject, give yourself a small break. And this probably isn't new information to you. You hear people say it over and over again. But you've got to think of it this way. If lots of people are saying this, it's because it works. Offer yourself small rewards after a chunk of revision. So it could be something like doing some revision, then watching an episode of a show that you're watching at the moment, or giving yourself a bit of gaming time, something like that in between. If you're feeling like you don't know how to revise, flip the thinking. Think of how not to revise and go from there. So everything that's on that list of how not to revise, don't do that. Do the opposite. Leave your phone in a different room while you revise to reduce distraction. It sounds like the most ridiculous thing to some people, like how can I not have my phone in the room? Literally go old school. Take those electronic distractions out of the room, because ultimately if that prevents you from just picking it up off your desk while you're revising, we can get wrapped up in things. I mean, how many times have we been on TikTok for a few minutes and been scrolling through it for hours? Save yourself the hassle of doing that. External websites. So have a look at some of these web pages. These are really key. So these are directly aimed around exam stress and coping with revision. Student Minds has a specific section on there. Young Minds has the coping with life, exam stress. Their hashtag Keep It in Perspective, you might want to look at that on Twitter. I'm sure that there are a few things that they've posted out there that may be of use to you. The NHS has direct information as well, looking after your mental health during exam periods, and Mind as well. So they have 14 ways to beat exam stress, some really basic tips and strategies there. Speak to people around you. If you've got older siblings who've been through all this before, chat to them, see what they did, and make sure that you are taking that time for yourself. Have a chat to your parents if you can. Have a realistic conversation with them. What genuinely are their expectations? Are you just assuming they expect you to be getting, A's and B's, or are they actually pretty happy with whatever you get? Have that discussion with them if you can. Talk to your progress tutors, talk to your subject teachers, speak to the professionals around you that are there to support you, and ultimately, if you feel like you're really struggling, have a chat with us at Student Wellbeing. We're always there to listen to anything that's on your mind.